The morning Elise found the envelope, she was already running late. Her daughter, May, had spilled orange juice on her uniform. The cat had knocked the car keys behind the dryer, and the cafe didn't open for another 40 minutes, meaning Elise had exactly that long to drive across town, set up the espresso machine, and pretend she was a functioning adult. She almost didn't pick it up. The envelope was tucked under her windshield wiper the way parking tickets were, plain white, no return address, just her name written in handwriting she didn't recognize. She almost shoved it in her bag without opening it. But something stopped her. The way her name was written, each letter careful and deliberate, like whoever wrote it had taken their time, like it mattered. Inside was a single photograph, her father, standing outside a building she didn't recognize, somewhere downtown, shaking hands with a man in a dark coat. The photo was dated 3 weeks ago. Her father had been dead for 6 years. Elise sat down on the curb in the parking lot of her apartment complex and stared at that photograph for a long time. May was inside with the neighbor. The cafe could wait. Everything could wait. Because the man in the dark coat, the one shaking her dead father's hand, she recognized him too. His name was Adrien Voss, and he was the man who had destroyed her life. She'd met Adrien at the worst possible time, which was probably how he'd planned it. She was 27, fresh out of nursing school, working brutal hours at a clinic in the South End of Boston while trying to keep the lights on after her father's supposed death had left her with nothing but debt and a one-bedroom apartment she could barely afford. She wasn't looking for anyone. She was too tired to look for anything except the next shift, the next paycheck, the next morning. Adrien had come into the clinic with a laceration on his forearm and the kind of calm that didn't belong in an emergency room. Most people who came in bleeding were scared or angry or drunk. He was none of those things. He sat in the intake chair and watched her work with an expression that she couldn't quite read, not curious exactly, more like he was confirming something he already knew. "You're Elise Harmon," he said. "Not a question. I'm the nurse who's going to stitch your arm," she said. "Hold still," he smiled, small and controlled. "Your father spoke highly of you." She almost dropped the suture kit. He claimed to be a business associate of her father's. Said he'd known Raymond Harmon for years, that her father had trusted him, and that he'd been looking for Elise ever since Raymond died. He said her father had left something with him, documents, financial records that rightfully belonged to her. He said he'd been trying to find the right time to reach out. She believed him. That was the part she couldn't forgive herself for, not for 6 years. She'd believed him because she wanted to, because losing her father had left this open wound in her chest that she'd just learned to carry around, and here was someone offering to help close it, and she'd been so tired and so lonely and so desperate for anything that connected her back to the man she'd lost. She spent 8 months with Adrien Voss, long enough to fall in love with him, or what she'd thought was love, long enough to learn that his business wasn't the kind that had a website or a registered address, long enough to get pregnant. The night she told him about May, he sat across from her at the kitchen table of his apartment with that same unreadable expression, and then he said something she hadn't been prepared for. "I have to be honest with you, Elise." She remembered thinking, okay, here it is. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. "I've never loved you," he said. "I need you to understand that. Whatever you thought this was, it wasn't that. I care about your well-being, and I'll make sure you're taken care of financially. But I can't give you what you're looking for." She stared at him for what felt like a full minute. "I'm pregnant," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her, flat and distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I know." His eyes didn't waver. "I'll provide for the child. But this relationship, what you've been imagining it to be, it's over. It was always going to end this way." She didn't cry until she got to her car. She drove home, sat in the parking lot of her apartment building, and cried until she couldn't anymore. Then she went inside, made herself a cup of tea, and started making a list. She'd been making lists ever since. May was 5 now and asked too many questions. She wanted to know why the sky turned pink before a storm. She wanted to know why the cafe's espresso machine made that specific hissing sound before the milk foamed. She wanted to know why some people had dads that came to school pickup, and some people had moms who came alone. Elise answered all of her questions as honestly as she could, which was easier with the espresso machine than with the last one. The café, Harmon's, she'd named it for her father, had taken 3 years to build. She'd done everything herself, or nearly. The business plan, the loans, the renovation of the small corner space on Clement Street, the hiring, the menu, the early mornings and the late nights when May slept at her neighbor Bet's apartment, and Elise stayed until midnight doing inventory. It wasn't glamorous. It was hers. Adrien had never come near it. He'd sent money the first 2 years, through a lawyer, enough to help with May's expenses, and then it had stopped. She hadn't gone looking for more. The last thing she wanted was another reason for Adrien Voss to be present in her life. So when she sat on that curb looking at the photograph of her dead father shaking his hand, she understood, in the way you understand a building is about to collapse before it actually falls, that whatever she'd thought she'd escaped hadn't finished with her. She took a photo of the photograph with her phone, tucked the original back in the envelope, and drove to the café. The man came in at 11. She knew he was there before she looked up. There was a shift in the energy of the room, subtle, the kind of thing you only noticed after years of reading a space. The regular morning crowd, the older couple by the window, the grad student who always ordered an oat milk latte and never made eye contact. They all continued exactly as they were, but something changed, a presence that didn't fit. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a coat that was too expensive for this neighborhood, and carrying nothing, no bag, no phone visible, no coffee in hand. He stood just inside the door and looked around the cafe with the focused patience of someone who wasn't browsing, someone who was locating. His eyes found her. He walked to the counter. Elise Harmon? His voice was low and unhurried. Depends on who is. My name is Conrad. I need to talk to you about your father. Every muscle in her body went still. My father is dead. Sit down with me, he said. Please, 5 minutes. And then I'll leave if you want me to. She looked at him for a long moment. He was maybe 35, dark-haired, with the kind of face that was arranged carefully into neutral, not unfriendly, but controlled. She'd seen that kind of control before, in Adrien, in the men who moved through Adrien's orbit. She should have said no. She called Petra, her afternoon barista, to come early, made herself a cortado, made him a black coffee he didn't ask for, and sat down at the corner table. Talk fast, she said. He talked for 20 minutes. She didn't stop him once. Her father, Raymond Harmon, had not died of a heart attack 6 years ago. Raymond Harmon had faked his death because he'd stumbled onto financial records that connected Adrien Voss to a trafficking network operating through 3 shell companies, and he'd been given a choice: disappear or be made to disappear. He'd chosen to disappear. He'd spent 6 years in protective custody under a federal witness program. He'd been building a case, and 3 weeks ago, according to Conrad, he had finally made contact with the federal prosecutor handling the file, the first official step toward finally bringing charges. Why are you telling me this? Elise said. Because Adrien Voss knows your father is alive, and because whoever sent you that photograph this morning did it for a reason. She felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. How do you know about the photograph? Because I sent it. Silence. She looked at Conrad's face. He met her gaze steadily, not the way Adrien had. Adrien's steadiness had always felt like a performance. This felt different, tired, like a man who had been carrying something for a long time and was finally setting it down in front of her. Why? She said. Because you needed to know the truth before he found you. And because you have something he wants. I don't have anything. Your father left something with you, Conrad said, before he disappeared. You may not know what it is, but Adrien Voss believes you have it. And now that your father is resurfacing, Adrien is going to start looking. Elise set down her cup. She thought about the storage unit she'd inherited when her father died. The boxes she hadn't fully gone through because it hurt too much to sit in a cold room surrounded by the physical remains of a life. The boxes that were still there, still locked, in a facility on the edge of the city. She thought about the key she'd worn around her neck for 6 years without quite knowing why. A small key, brass, the kind that opened a padlock. She'd thought it was sentimental. She stood up. I have to go get my daughter, she said. She picked May up from school 20 minutes early, which May thought was the greatest thing that had ever happened to her, and peppered the whole drive home with detailed theories about why Elise had come early and what this might mean for the afternoon. Elise let her talk. She called Bet from the parking lot and asked if May could stay for dinner. Bet said of course. Elise brought May upstairs, made sure she was settled with her coloring books and Bet's ancient tabby cat, and then drove to the storage facility alone. The padlock opened on the first try. The boxes were how she'd left them, stacked, labeled in her father's neat handwriting, kitchen stuff, books, financial records 2004-2011. She went through every box. It took 2 hours. At the bottom of the last box, the one labeled MISC, which was every dad's way of saying things I didn't know what to do with, she found it. A thumb drive. Taped to the inside of a hardback novel her father used to read to her when she was small, A Farewell to Arms. She'd thought he'd kept the book for the same reason she'd kept the key. Sentiment. She held the thumb drive in her palm and thought, Dad, you could have just told me. And then, because that wasn't an option right now, she put it in her jacket pocket and drove home. Conrad was waiting outside her building. You found something, he said. It wasn't a question. You're following me. I'm trying to keep you alive. He looked tired in the evening light. Elise, I need you to listen to me. Whatever you found, Adrien's people may already know you have it. His network has people inside the storage facility company. You being there tonight may have flagged. Then, why didn't you stop me from going? Because it's your father's. You had the right. He paused. And because I needed to see if you'd come back. She looked at him. Why does that matter? Because the people running this case need to know you're not going to take that drive and destroy it. Your father built his case on copies, but the originals, transaction records, account numbers, real names, they're on physical drives. If you destroy it because you're scared, I'm not going to destroy it. Her voice was steadier than she expected. I'm a nurse, Conrad. I've had people's lives in my hands on bad days. I know what it costs to make a choice and then walk away from it. She met his eyes. I need to know who you are. He was quiet for a moment. I'm a federal investigator, he said. I've been running background support on the Voss case for 4 years. Your father trusted me. I'm asking you to extend some of that trust to me, even though you have absolutely no reason to. You're right, she said. I have no reason to. She looked up at the window of Bet's apartment, where she could see the faint warm light, and if she looked carefully, the silhouette of May's head bent over something on the table. Come upstairs, Elise said. I'll make coffee, and you're going to tell me everything. What Conrad told her over the next 3 hours rearranged the architecture of the last 6 years of her life. Adrien Voss was not a businessman who operated in gray areas. He was a man who had built a financial empire specifically designed to make human exploitation look like investment portfolios. The shell companies moved money. The money funded operations in 4 cities. The operations moved people. Her father had discovered the first thread when he was doing accounting work for one of Adrien's companies. A job he'd taken because the money was good and he'd needed it. He'd noticed discrepancies that didn't make sense for a legitimate business. He'd pulled the thread, and then a man had come to his door and told him what pulling threads led to. He didn't tell me, Elise said. She didn't mean it as an accusation. It came out that way anyway. He was protecting you, Conrad said. He knew the safest version of you was one who genuinely didn't know anything. He let me grieve him for 6 years. Yes. She was quiet for a long time. Adrien came to me, she said finally. He said he'd known my father. He said my father trusted him. The words tasted like something corroded. He was looking for the drive. We believe so. We think he knew Raymond had made copies. He needed to find them before they surfaced. And May, she stopped. Her throat tightened in a way she hadn't felt in a long time, the particular tightening of anger that was too large to stay contained. Was May a strategy? Was she? Did he? Conrad looked at her directly. We don't have evidence that the pregnancy was intentional. I'm not going to tell you something I don't know. She appreciated that. She hated him for it at the same time. Okay, she said. She set down her cup. What do you need from me? What they needed was complicated. The drive she'd found wasn't enough on its own. It needed to be submitted as part of a formal chain of evidence with documentation of how it had been stored and accessed. Conrad needed her to cooperate with the federal prosecutor's team, give a formal statement about her relationship with Adrien and everything she knew about his associates, and agree to increase security for herself and May while the case moved toward indictment. She agreed to all of it. What she did not agree to was Conrad's suggestion that she and May temporarily relocate. "I'm not running," she said. "I ran once. I left everything I'd built in my old life and I started over because I thought starting over was the safest thing. I'm not doing that again. This is May's home. This is my cafe. I'm not packing a bag and hiding somewhere because Adrien Voss gets to dictate my life." Conrad looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "That's it? Just okay? You're not in federal custody. You have rights. You've agreed to cooperate. Beyond that," he shrugged slightly, "I'll put people on the building. You won't see them. But they'll be there." "What about my father?" she said. The question had been sitting in her throat since he'd first told her the truth. She'd been afraid to ask it, in the same way you were afraid to ask the doctor for a specific number on a bad test result. Knowing made it real. "He's been asking about you," Conrad said, "for years. Every check-in, his first question was about you. He knows about May. He paused. He knows her name. He has a photo of her, the one you posted publicly when she was born." Elise pressed her fingers against her eyes. "I need you to tell me if he's okay," she said. "He's okay. He's safe. And if this goes the way we expect, if the indictment moves forward, there's no reason you can't see him within a few months." A few months. She thought about 6 years of Father's Day cards she'd written and put in a box because she didn't know where to send them. "Okay," she said. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of her life. She opened the cafe every morning. She made May's lunches and drove her to school. She gave her formal statement to the federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Denise, who asked every question twice and wrote everything down. She worked her shifts. She restocked the pastry case and unclogged the bathroom drain and arbitrated a minor conflict between 2 of her employees over the scheduling spreadsheet. Life continued in its ordinary, insistent way. Conrad came by the cafe most mornings, always near closing time, always ordering the same black coffee he never finished. She wasn't sure if he was monitoring her or the building or both. She stopped caring about the distinction. He was quiet company, which she appreciated. He didn't ask how she was doing with the emotional magnitude of everything. He just showed up. On a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the photograph under the windshield wiper, he came in at 7 and didn't order coffee. "We need to move tonight," he said. "Move what?" "The indictment dropped an hour ago. Voss's legal team already knows. We have maybe a 12-hour window before he moves assets and evidence, and we need you somewhere safe until the arrest is confirmed." Elise took off her apron, called Bet, kissed May's hair, and told her it was a sleepover adventure. May thought that was excellent. They drove to a federal safe house in Waltham that turned out to be a perfectly ordinary colonial house on a perfectly ordinary street, which Elise found both reassuring and faintly absurd. She didn't sleep. At 4 in the morning, Conrad knocked on the bedroom door and opened it without waiting, which told her something had happened. "He's in custody," he said. She sat up. The room was gray and quiet around her. "My father? Your father is fine. He's already been notified," he asked. Conrad stopped, cleared his throat. "He asked if you were safe." Elise looked at the window. Outside, the streetlight made a pale circle on the quiet road. "Tell him yes," she said. She saw her father for the first time in 6 years on a Thursday morning in a federal building in downtown Boston, in a conference room with fluorescent lighting and a water cooler that made an intermittent clicking sound. Raymond Harmon was older, obviously. His hair had gone fully white, and he walked with a slight stiffness she didn't remember. But when she came through the door and stopped because she couldn't make herself move any further, he stood up from the chair and looked at her with an expression she'd only ever seen once before. The day she'd graduated from nursing school, and he'd been in the audience, and she'd found his face in the crowd. Like she was the whole point. She crossed the room and didn't say anything. He put his arms around her the way he always had, one hand on the back of her head the way he'd done since she was small, and she stood there for a long time with her face against his shoulder, not crying exactly, something more fundamental than that. "I have a granddaughter," he said finally into her hair. "Her name is May," Elise said. "She asks too many questions. You'll love her." His laugh was the same. Exactly the same, low and cracked at the edges. She hadn't let herself remember how much she'd missed it until she heard it again. They sat down. They talked for 4 hours. The fluorescent light clicked overhead, and the water cooler made its intermittent sound, and it was the best conversation she'd had in 6 years. Conrad was waiting in the hallway when she came out. He was leaning against the wall, hands in his coat pockets, looking at his shoes the way people did when they were giving you privacy in a public space. "He wants to meet May," she said. "I know. He told me." He looked up. His expression was careful, but something else lived underneath it, something she'd been noticing for a while and choosing not to look at directly. "How are you?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Ask me in a year." He nodded. She looked at him for a moment. "You've been looking out for us," she said. "You and your invisible people on the building. It was my job." "Was," she said. He met her eyes. "The case is closed, more or less. My official involvement, Conrad." She said his name the same way she said May when she wanted her daughter to stop deflecting. "You came into my café every morning for 3 weeks and let your coffee get cold. That wasn't just surveillance." A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that had something in it. "No," he said finally. "It wasn't." She nodded. She wasn't ready for anything, not really. She was still processing the fact that her father was alive and her café was still standing, and Adrien Voss was in federal custody, and May was currently at Bet's apartment explaining to the cat why cats didn't have eyebrows. But she was also 33 years old and had been running alone for a long time. "Coffee at 9, she said. "Tomorrow. Come in before the morning rush. I'll actually make you something you'll want to drink." He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, still careful, still controlled, but underneath it, finally unmistakably warm. 9, he said. She drove back across the city as the afternoon light turned everything gold, the way Boston sometimes did in fall, unexpectedly, almost offensively beautiful. She rolled down the window and let the cold air in. She thought about her father's hands. The same. Still the same. She thought about May asking why some kids had 2 parents and some kids had 1, and how she'd answered as honestly as she could, which was, "Families come in every shape. Ours is still whole." She thought about the key she'd worn around her neck for 6 years. The brass padlock key that had turned out to be exactly what it appeared to be, a key to the box where her father had left everything he couldn't say out loud. She'd had it all along. She just hadn't known what door it opened. She parked in front of the cafe, even though it was closed now, the lights off inside and the chairs up on the tables. She sat for a moment looking at the name painted on the window. Harmon's. Her father was alive. Her daughter was 4 blocks away, explaining eyebrow theory to a cat. Tomorrow morning she would open the cafe at 7, pull the first espresso of the day, and at 9 o'clock someone who had been showing up for weeks, quietly, steadily, without being asked, would come through the door. Elise started the car again, drove the 4 blocks to Bet's apartment, knocked on the door, and heard, from behind it, May's voice rising in the middle of some long and elaborate sentence, already building toward whatever question came next. She smiled before the door even opened. Some things, it turned out, didn't need to fall apart before you could find your way back to them. Some things had just been waiting, patient as a key on a chain, for you to finally understand what they were for.